You know when you just moved your hair like that? Keep your hand there. That's nice. That's good. Keep that position. That's great. That's fantastic.
Anyone can take a portrait. Well, anyone with a camera and a basic knowledge of photography. You set up some soft light, you blur the background, you pick a flattering focal length, you pose your subject and a perfectly serviceable portrait. But here's the thing, technique isn't what makes a great portrait. Take Joseph Karsh's legendary portrait of Winston Churchill, for example. Why is this portrait iconic? Is it because the background is blurred? Is it because the lighting is soft and flattering? Is it because Churchill's face pops from the background? I mean, these things are important and they make it technically solid, but it's not why it's great. It's great because of the thing that is captured in the shot. You see, when this portrait was taken, Churchill had just finished delivering a powerful speech and he was gruff and defiant, and he refused to put out his cigar for the photo. And Karsh, under pressure with just 2 minutes to get the shot, did something pretty bold. He walked up to his subject and plucked the cigar right out of Churchill's mouth. Churchill was not very happy about this and he fixed the photographer with a stern glare. But that was exactly the look of sheer, unfiltered defiance that encapsulated Churchill's image as an unshakable wartime leader. And that was the moment that Karsh decided to capture. Pure Churchill. And that is what makes this portrait unforgettable. So was this just luck? Was it a one-off moment of brilliance? Probably not when you consider Karsh's incredible body of work. And this is because some photographers have a rare ability to capture portraits that really stick with you. Photos that end up being used on book covers, being hung in the National Portrait Gallery, or win World Press Photo Awards. So how do you learn to take portraits like this? Well, a good start would be asking someone who actually does. So I interviewed renowned portrait photographer Harry Borden. If you don't recognise the name, the chances are you'll at least recognise some of his work. He's a 2-time World Press Photo Award winner. He has over 100 portraits in the National Portrait Gallery collection, a place where he's had a solo exhibition before. He was made an honorary Fellow of the Royal Photographic Society. His work has graced the pages of Vogue, of The New Yorker, of Time magazine, and many, many others. And on a side note, Harry's also recently started a rather brilliant YouTube channel that he runs with his son Fred. And on that he shares stories and insights from his decades behind the lens, photographing celebrities, icons, other people. If you're even remotely interested in photography, it is really worth subscribing to, because while there are plenty of great YouTube photography channels out there, few YouTubers come with credentials like this guy. Harry Borden is a wealth of experience and knowledge, so I wanted to see whatever I could learn from him. So we sat down and I talked with him to see if I could gain any insight into what it really takes to capture a portrait that lingers in your mind long after you've looked away. I'll put the full interview up on my YouTube channel as a separate video shortly, but here is an edited version that I think best showcases the most educational points from my chat with him. So you've had, and still very much do have, a very successful photographic career. You've got 2 World Press Photo Awards, you've had a solo exhibition in the National Portrait Gallery. Can you tell us a bit about how you got to the position where you are now?
I never really let photography become a chore. And so initially I was working for trade magazines. I was working for anyone who would pay me because I came to London with nothing. As a byproduct of doing thousands of jobs for them, I might get the opportunity to photograph someone famous that I could put into my portfolio, and then I could go and see the Independent on Sunday Review, because the Sunday Times and the Observer wouldn't give you any jobs. I carried on working for anyone who would pay me, but by the time I had a commission, say from the New Yorker, I was really battle hardened. I really kind of was confident in my kind of grasp of the medium. I was really able to kind of express myself and get something interesting. There isn't one sort of defining thing. There isn't a sort of strategy. Really, all I've ever tried to do is, get some pictures that make the picture editors look good, and then it's a virtuous cycle. That'll get you more commissions, and you make them look even better. The best way to improve as a photographer is to take more pictures.
So, was photographing celebrities always a goal of yours?
I'm not enamored with the world of celebrity particularly. Certainly, I'm prurient, and I'm sort of inquisitive by nature. And certainly, people, if you define celebrities as people who've done something noteworthy of interest, then they're inherently interesting. I would definitely say that celebrities, or i.e., anyone that you get to photograph, is a good barometer of where you are in terms of your uh, portrait photography. And by this stage, I'd sort of would regard myself as a portrait photographer. I think everyone is sort of fascinating, and so I, purely as a mechanism by which I could sort of judge my the how people valued my photography. Photographing celebrities is a useful mechanism for that. Plus, of course, as since 1988, the default is you own the copyright of the pictures, and so therefore, if you photograph a picture of Robin Williams or whoever, then there's a chance, as with Robin Williams, actually, it's a good example, that 20 years later, the picture could get used on the cover of his autobiography after he's died. It makes sense to photograph celebrities because more people will see your pictures and more people will make assumptions about you as a photographer, and they're all good.
You seem to have a real ability to take those portraits that end up getting picked for things like the covers of books or they end up on permanent display at the National Portrait Gallery. So, what do you consider to be the qualities that make up a great portrait? What is it that makes an image unique and memorable for you?
I think for me, it's encapsulated in a phrase that a portrait is a record of the relationship you have with the person on the day. And so it's about connection. And there can be kind of a complete lack of connection. Like, I photographed Terence Conran a few times, and he was quite a sort of difficult and a kind of hostile presence. And then one of the first pictures I took, I remember he was puffing on a cigar, and I put him in front of this abstract painting, and I think it got into the equivalent of the Taylor Wessing, the National Portrait Gallery competition. It was one of my first back in about 91. And so you can have no connection, and that's a sort of connection in itself, a complete bullishness and hostility to the photographer, which you can work with. But by and large, it's that feeling of being close to someone, and it's a connection through the eyes. And so for me, the eyes are really, really key to a portrait often. The times that it's failed, I remember doing Adrian Brody. I still got good pictures, but I found out that he was really into hip hop, which you wouldn't think, but he's really into rap and stuff like that. And I found myself, I just found that fact, and I found myself bringing that up, and it just made a completely ersatz fake kind of conversation that led nowhere because it wasn't me being me. It was me sort of researching the subject and sort of feeding him what I thought he'd want to talk about.
A lot of your portraits are environmental. The spaces that you pick and how you get your subject to interact with those spaces, I find very interesting. Your shot of Tony Blair, that sticks out particularly in my mind. 'Cause there's something slightly surreal about it, about that location with the doorway and the anachronistic telephone and the hose. What is it that you look for when you're looking for a space to take a photograph of someone in? Do you have preconceived ideas of what you want before the shoot, or do you just go with what you find on the day?
It's completely serendipitous. I don't like to have any preconceived ideas. It's like jazz. I mean, I just turn up, and that Tony Blair shoot was like that. I was able to persuade um, Alistair Campbell that we should do it outside. It was at the weekend, and he was being interviewed by Kamal Ahmed and Andrew Rawnsley for the Observer. And So I took some pictures of him being interviewed, and then I had a wander around number 10. And the garden is kind of weird. It's like this little oasis of calm and so on. And then I happened upon that door. And I think it's an element of my photography which isn't really about portraits. Before I had the confidence to sort of take portraits of people, which I find much more rewarding, I would obviously take pictures of things. And what I would look for is a weird atmosphere, a sort of graphic sort of tension, and something that's sort of indescribable. And as I've got older, my sensitivity to these places has become more acute. So I look for an interesting space, a space that sort of intrigues me on a very intuitive level. Not I can't sort of write down a bullet point list of things that I look for. I just sort of trust my instincts, and it can be some weird light that's reflecting off a building and then coming back in and kind of creating this strange light. I mean, there's a picture I took of my mum with before she died, and she's just sitting on the bench, and there's no light on her, and the lights reflect the sun is going hard onto a greenhouse, and it's coming back onto her, and she's sitting next to the dog on this bench. So I just look for strangeness and weirdness, and then I pop someone into that location and record the relationship that we have on the day.
So I noticed that props appear quite regularly in your portraits, and it's something I'd like to ask about because I particularly like that one of Lena Dunham sat on the pink flamingos. Again, because I think it just has that slight edge of surreality for me. How much do you plan when bringing props to a shoot? Is it something you put a lot of thought into? Do you choreograph it a lot?
I'm not that guy, I'm not David LaChapelle. I tend to kind of get shoehorned into doing that. And The Guardian, basically, she was writing a piece, I think it was about Love Island. The Guardian said, "Can you pick up a sunbed? And we can shoot her against the sunbed, maybe." It's completely ridiculous and badly organized. And I got to Wales in the end, sort of just before it was about to get dark. So it was really by the skin of my teeth, but it also meant that the light was good. But I went into, Aldi, and I saw the pink flamingos. Whenever I have been pressured into bringing along props and everything, it has actually worked out quite well. Sometimes it can take you to good places, or maybe I'm just remembering the times it's worked well. So, for instance, I was photographing Paul Merton, from Have I Got News for You? And my assistant gave me these wax lips, and we tried to get Ronnie Corbett to wear them when I was photographing him, and he was sort of very serious about his comedy, and he wouldn't do it, and so they were just in the car, so I brought them along, and then Paul Merton didn't take himself quite so seriously and wore the lips, and they worked well. So with Lena Dunham, I loved her. I loved her since Tiny Furniture. So it was kind of there were no boundaries. She's not a boundaries sort of person, and you go straight in deep. And she's wonderful to work with because she was just really happy to go there. And so the other pictures were interesting as well. And I love the fact that she's so comfortable in her body, and could just inhabit that role.
Do you have any go-to phrases that you use to get people to give you that right facial expression or the right demeanor? Do you have any specific things that you like always ask people to do?
Yeah, it's weird. As you were saying that, I was thinking, no, that's the death of spontaneity. And then I thought, well, actually, what I tend to say, I practically say it on every shoot, is absence of thought. So that's my thing, absence of thought, because I think sometimes it's nice to see someone in repose. And so, for instance, Lorraine Kelly, who I just photographed, she's all twinkly and smiley and everything. And as soon as you get her and you say to her absence of thought, and everything just drops slightly, and you get to scrutinize her in a way that you don't normally see when she's presenting the breakfast show. But I tend to kind of just ensure that I have an authentic human exchange. At the beginning of many, many shoots, I get, quite often people say, "I really don't enjoy being photographed." And at the end, they go, "Oh, that wasn't so bad. I actually quite enjoyed that." And that's because it's sort of not an empty exercise in me stamping people with a treatment or technique. It's just I'm sufficiently in control of the medium that it's about me, one person meeting another person.
Do you have any particular favorite focal lengths that you like to use? What are your thoughts on using different focal lengths to portraits? What's your go-to normally?
I think sometime in the past, I noticed that all the pictures that I admired, that I aspired to take, are sort of taken on basically the standard lens, and mostly with daylight. I mean, it sounds banal saying it sounds kind of absurd, um, and sort of bombastic, sort of saying that all pictures are taken on the standard lens. But that's what your eye sees. And then it becomes less photographic. I think it was Cartier-Bresson sort of saw the camera as a notepad. So I tend to now sort of see the pictures, and then basically the last thing I do is bring the camera up and just I try not to over uh, compose the picture or try and make aesthetic judgments looking through the viewfinder. Really, the definition of someone whose work is recognizable, that they have a unique visual fingerprint, is a consistency of approach. And so it's about like your video about setting parameters. You know, if I don't know if it's that or the fact that I started with a camera with a 50 millimeter lens and I had it for a long time. Pictures that are taken on long lenses look like photographs taken with long lenses, and similarly, wide lenses look like photographs taken with wide lenses. But if you think about a picture that's taken that closely has the same sort of perspective as your eye, that's always what you usually see in good paintings or anything that is kind of capturing the way that we as human beings sort of see the world. So I would strongly advise if anyone's starting photography to just start with a single fixed lens and stick with that and get used to actually seeing pictures. And then what can happen over time is you develop a unique visual fingerprint because all the pictures in your portfolio really should be the same picture, the same sort of obsessive need to compose things a certain way. And that's how you get a consistency of vision. And that's how you become known as a photographer.
So I know you're a big advocate of using natural light in your portraits. What are your thoughts on natural light versus artificial light? Why do you gravitate towards natural light?
It's almost meditative. There's something very profound about noticing what is already there. And it's kind of sort of arrogant or vainglorious to kind of attempt to kind of create the majesty of what is already existing. I know how to use Flash and I've got lots of tricks. You know, I know how Nick Knight would have I worked it out and I talked to other photographers and assistants who've worked with great photographers, and I have all that in my armory, and I have a trunk load of equipment, lighting equipment. But in the successful shoots, it stays in the trunk because I arrive and then there's some strange light that's just sort of reflecting, going through a window and then reflecting on a mirror and then coming back. Those are sort of wonderful, sort of serendipitous things. Also, it's probably slightly born out of laziness, but a laziness that ends up making you more productive. Because if you're using available light and you've got an hour with Baroness Thatcher or whatever, and you're in the location, you can get a load more scenarios within the time constraints that you have.
So I've heard you mention that your influences are people like Richard Avedon, Diane Arbus, Irving Penn. These photographers, their portfolios are primarily black and white, and yet your work seems to be mainly color. Can you tell me a bit about your choice to shoot color over black and white? What do you feel about color and black and white in contemporary photography?
Yeah, I sort of think that I wouldn't want to hitch my cart to a temporary limitation in the evolution of photography. But having said that, I wouldn't pour scorn on black and white. But I started in black and white. I had my own black and white darkroom. I love printing black and white. It just seems slightly perverse now we're shooting on with, highly evolved digital cameras that record in color, to throw that information away, unless there's a very good reason to do so. There's an element of sentimentality, there's an element of nostalgia, there's an element of faux seriousness, as though this is a news photograph, it has to be in black and white. And that's because of the context in which we viewed these kind of iconic images of the past, like the girl running, the napalm girl, in Vietnam, or whatever, these sort of very profoundly iconic pictures which are part of the landscape of the last century, in terms of recording recent history.
Do you have any shoots that stick out in your mind as being your favourites? And why were they your favourites?
I do have favorites. At the moment, I quite like. It's been 25 years, and I do quite like the Spice Girls picture. It was a time when a lot of things were coming together. I think I got 3 pictures in the National Portrait Gallery competition. Not that picture, which is actually in the National Portrait Gallery. But I like it on a photographic level as well, because it has 2 different lightings in the same picture. So you've got Victoria on one side, and she's sort of backlit, and then you've got Jerry, like the girl in the pearl earring, sort of lit by side lighting, sort of Renaissance painting lighting. And it's a genuine moment, and it's a nice composition, and it's also, you tend to kind of like pictures that you appreciate were hard to get. So it was difficult wrangling those girls, and to get them all together and get a genuine moment and get it on medium format and shoot it in Bangkok and successfully expose it, and then for it to get into the National Portrait Gallery, and then people talk about the 90s now in a way that they used to talk about the 60s. I have a feeling that picture will become, one of my better known images, and I like it. It's a genuine moment. I remember there was a picture I did of I can't remember who it was. It was a famous playwright, David Hare or somebody like that. And at the agency I was part of, there was a photographer called Tom Stoddart, who's a famous war photographer. He's brilliant. He's no longer with us. And he basically was this Geordie. And I remember they were scanning my negatives, and this picture was like a headshot. And it got caught in the Imacon scanner in the agency, and it got ripped in half. Tom just said, "It doesn't matter. It wasn't a moment." And you know what? He was right. It wasn't a moment. And so that was quite an instructive thing that happened, because it made me realize. And I did get influenced by the other photographers at the agency, and they were documentary photographers. They were into capturing moments, they weren't obsessed with technique. It didn't matter if things were out of focus, if there was sort of impact. I mean, obviously, things are meant to be sharp where they're meant to be sharp, but there wasn't this sort of fetishization of photographic technique. It was about telling a story. And so for me, that's another key ingredient. Whether you've got, it's nice to have all that technical stuff, but if it's a moment, that's the icing on the cake. That's what's important.
Now, this isn't something that particularly bothers me, but it does seem to be a common source of internet discourse among photographers: film versus digital. So, you've shot a large amount of your work on film, and you seem to have sort of moved to digital now. What are your thoughts on these mediums? Does it even matter?
I sold most of my film cameras, and was very fiercely against the idea that you would kind of hitch your cart to something that was a soon to be redundant technology. Yes, I mean, people say it does slow you down, but just slow down. You shouldn't need to kind of pay £3 a frame in order to slow yourself down. There are an awful lot of photographers for whom the most important thing about their work is that it's shot on film. And for me, if that's the most important thing about your work, then you really need to question what it is you're doing. I think at the beginning, there was an argument to be made that film was better quality, that it had something about it. But now a lot of those cameras, they have film um, sort of filters that you can put on without going into all the boring detail. The gamut is much better. I shot my last book by but one, A Single Dad, for sentimental reasons and maybe to go back to a place that I felt comfortable and happy when I was shooting on film, and to reacquaint myself with my old Hasselblad. I shot it on film, but it was such an onerous process, all the scanning and then cleaning up the files and then getting the cross curves and the color correction. Um, I don't know if I will go back to film anymore.
So, as well as shooting all these celebrities, you've also done quite a lot of personal projects. You did this survivor book about survivors of the Holocaust. You've got your book on divorce that looks at divorced couples. You've got your single dad's book. You've got a load of other projects. How does your approach differ when you're photographing someone who isn't famous as opposed to photographing a celebrity?
It's a chicken and egg situation. I mean, well, it's just flipped. I mean, basically, the reason I'm good at photographing um, famous people is because I treat them like they're just people. We're all just floundering around trying to make sense of the world, and so there's no kind of hierarchy in my mind. I tend to concentrate on having an authentic human exchange, and that can be with somebody who is living in the woods, for my Woodlanders project, or Four Hugs Wide, or somebody who's a great global statesman or a banker like George Soros. I think people who are less famous, they have less guile, and they can be more nervous, but the pictures can have more authenticity, and it's easier to get something that has some poignancy and resonates, because the other people are adept, the celebrities are adept at kind of giving you what they want to give you, and quite often that's the mark of a good celebrity portrait photographer, is actually getting under their skin and getting something that's unexpected.
Do you have any views on how advancements in technology have affected photography? Is this something you've experienced personally?
Certainly in terms of technology, it's massively helped me, because I'm getting older, I'm succumbing to human frailty. I had a detached retina, and it hasn't affected my practice at all, because the photographs are created in your mind, and with modern, highly evolved digital autofocus, auto exposure cameras, you can concentrate on what's important, which is sort of recording an intimate relationship you have with a person, and you haven't got to kind of be slightly appearing like you're insincere because you're worrying about f-stops or shutter speeds. That's why the ultimate example of that is the camera phone. So you can just take pictures in a really free way and get technically reasonable results. And so photography can be about less a kind of process of showing your how technically adept you are, and more about recording what matters to you in the world.
Harry Borden, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I found Harry really inspiring just to chat to. He's so knowledgeable and he's so concise and reasoned in his opinions. He really understands what he's doing and he understands why he's doing it. So I wanted to sum up a few key learning points that I've taken from my interview with him. Firstly, probably the most important one, the best way to improve as a photographer is to take more pictures. So I sound simple, but I cannot emphasize this strongly enough. Reading books, going to galleries, watching YouTube videos, they're all great things to do, but they mean nothing if you don't get your camera and go out there and practice and take photos. Secondly, if you want to be commercially successful, it helps to take photographs of things that people want to see. So with Harry, he shoots celebrities, but it could be anything that will be of interest to people. Make your photography useful. Thirdly, think more about locations when you're taking portraits. Find a place and then put someone in it. Don't make it a quick afterthought. Think about how your subject will interact with the scene. Look for a place with graphic tension or a kind of weird energy. Find a place with strange objects or interesting light or a little space that you can fit a person. And try to work as intuitively as you can here. Try not to overthink it, just kind of feel it. 4, find a phrase that helps people drop their facade. So for Harry, he says absence of thought. And this is a much better approach than instructing someone to perform a certain facial expression or a pose. So I suppose it's a bit like the Stanislavski method in acting. So you could ask them to recall an emotive memory or something. It could be a happy memory, a poignant memory, whatever you want it to be. But if you're making them experience a real emotion, the camera will catch it and the audience will feel it. 5, embrace natural light. Learn to work with artificial light, but only use it when you need to. Daylight means you've got less setup, so you have more time, but it also creates these serendipitous scenes where it bounces and reflects and refracts in ways that you wouldn't have thought of. And that can make your shot a lot more interesting. 6, so it's best to use a standard focal length unless you have a specific reason to do otherwise. So something like 35mm, 50mm, it roughly mirrors how we see, so we tend to focus on the subject rather than the technicalities of the image. It removes the sense of looking through a lens and instead creates a more natural, immersive experience. And that will make it easier for an audience to connect with the subject. 7, be consistent in your approach and your work will start to become recognisable. So when viewers can instantly identify photos as yours, it strengthens your artistic voice and that will make you more hireable. 8, if you're shooting black and white, just consider why you're doing that. Of course, there are many great reasons to shoot black and white, and there are many great black and white photographers out there. But I suppose this is more about trying to avoid making artistic decisions based on sentiment or nostalgia, because those factors, they're transient. 9, don't fetishize technique. Remember, you're making an image, you're telling a story. So a photograph shot on film has no more or less value than a photograph shot digitally. It only matters what's in the frame. And embrace progress. Don't cling to redundant processes because you're cynical about the future. Find a way to bring value into how the world is moving forward. Well, one of the things I've really taken away from chatting with Harry wasn't something he specifically said, but more from just looking at his work and thinking about his approach. And it's that you shouldn't let shoots intimidate you into not being creative. So you obviously need to get what the people paying you want, but get that out of the way and then you can be creative. Because it's those creative shots that get remembered. And if it helps, just remember that we're all just people. As Harry said, we're all just floundering around trying to find our place in the world. So whether that's your friends, your family, clients, CEOs, celebrities, we're all just the same, really. So I'd like to thank Harry Borden very much for his input, both for his contribution to this video and also just for generally being an incredibly inspiring person to chat to. So go subscribe to his YouTube channel now, because you won't regret doing that. So just go do it. Now, go do it. Off you go. Bye.